So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our department chair, Dr. Martin Edwards. He's going to give you a lot of great detail about his academic interests. But one of the things to highlight about Dr. Edwards is not only is his research on the international monetary institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, very policy relevant. He's presented his research to the staffs of both of the organizations that he's written on. But his most recent book included research that he conducted with 16 school of diplomacy students. So he highlights both of those themes that I talked about, policy relevance and student relevance in the research. Plus, he's a really dynamic teacher, and you'll see why in just a minute. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Edwards.
Thanks, Dean Smith. Good afternoon now, everybody. It's great to have a chance to talk with you today. And I'm sorry that we normally do this in person, but we'll do this way for now. The one thing that I want to stress is that if you have any questions about anything that you hear today, you can certainly reach out to any of us. My email address and all of our email addresses are firstname.lastname@shu.edu. So it's martin.edwards. And I'm happy to follow up with you about anything that you hear here today. So I play a couple of roles in the diplomacy school. I'm a professor, so that means I have teaching and research obligations. And I'm also at the midpoint of my first term as department chair. And what that means is I'm kind of a conductor, I guess, in some sense, on behalf of the faculty. I represent the faculty and work closely with the deans on all manner of things. And the main task for the last week has been getting everything ready for student registration for the spring semester. In that role, I met with about 20 students in the past few days, and they're all doing great. They're working hard in their classes. They're doing what they need to stay safe. And they're an incredibly happy bunch. They've been remarkably adaptive during this semester. And, we're also very proud of them. Everyone had, natural concerns about how the semester was going to go. And it's been just a huge success. But that's a credit to everyone doing the things that they need to do to be successful. So from your vantage point, in this job, I'm a point of contact with student concerns. And they certainly hear from me quite a lot. And I hear from them quite a lot. So there's a lot of information that's going to be thrown at you today. And the one thing that I want you to sort of focus on as I'm speaking is a number, and that number is 650. And when I come back to the close, I'll explain the importance of that number in just a bit. So I've been asked to teach about the classes that I teach and my research. So I was hired in diplomacy in 2006, and I'm a bit of a Swiss Army knife in some sense, and so that means I cover a different range of classes. Undergraduates encounter me in one of three places. I teach institutions of global governance, which is a sophomore level class on the politics of international cooperation. I teach undergraduate research methods, and that's a class that teaches students how social science research is done. And I also teach in our capstone senior research project class. So that tells you something, right? We work at Seton Hall on a scholar-teacher model. And so the faculty that you meet are actually the faculty that you'll have the opportunity to take classes from. As a scholar, I'm committed to working with students. And this includes both graduate and undergraduate students. Earlier this spring, I wrote an op-ed with a diplomacy senior, and she is currently a Rhodes Scholar nominee for the university. Okay, so to me, I think it's really important. The thing that I want to stress to you is that you use your classwork to make connections with faculty. We open doors for students, but it's on you to get on our radar screens, right? And that's really important. I think that there's an intellectual jump between high school and college that everyone takes, and passivity might have gotten you through high school, but the time for that is over. So my research is on the less studied aspects of the International Monetary Fund. Okay, the International Monetary Fund lends to countries, but it also monitors them through annual reviews, and these reviews are publicly disseminated. And right now, the headwinds that the pandemic is creating in the global economy are really important and have wide-ranging effects, especially outside the developed world. Many developing countries have been reliant on cheap foreign capital to cover budget shortfalls, to finance infrastructure, and the pandemic has led to a number of problems. It's harmed growth, it's made government finances more precarious, and it's made it harder to cover those debt payments. So before the pandemic, the International Monetary Fund was saying that half of the low-income countries were at risk for debt distress. And obviously now, with the pandemic, the problem's only getting worse. So right now, something that I'm researching is what the IMF has said in these policy reviews about highly indebted African countries in the year prior to the pandemic. Did it actually warn them that their debt levels were becoming unsustainable? Did it warn them that changes in risk preferences on the part of lenders might cause those capital flows that they're relying on to dry up? And the evidence suggests that it actually did on both fronts. And so we're certainly concerned about the dangers of a developing country debt crisis, and that's no joke. There is little doubt that the IMF plays a very important early warning function. So this is a project that I'll be presenting at a conference organized by the University of Pretoria in South Africa in 2 weeks. Quite obviously, I'm not going to South Africa, and I'm really saddened about it, but we'll just do it this way. So in coming months, I'll be continuing work on this project and then finishing up a grant project from the USC Center for Public Diplomacy on how the IMF uses social media. Both of these projects were aided by work from students, including, again, diplomacy undergrads. So all of this goes back to the key lesson that I outlined. It's important to use your class time wisely and to use faculty office hours wisely. Okay? You know, the fact that we're a sort of a professional school, I think, makes it easy for students to make this connection. If you worked in an office, you know, you would consistently try to get your boss's attention to earn a promotion, right? Your experience in our program should be no different. And so what that means is each student needs to think about how to create a personal relationship with each of the faculty members. So I gave you a number at the start, and that number is 650. I use that in these talks because 650 is the total number of student letters of recommendation that I've written at Seton Hall. I can't think of a more sort of a short, sweet, to the point way to talk about my commitment to student mentoring than to give you that number. To me, that's, I'm not anywhere near retirement age, but that's really. But that's going to be my legacy here. That's how I think of, that's how I think of how I've spent my time working at Seton Hall. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Robert, can we jump to the next slide? Okay, great. So the other thing that I want to talk about is sort of the rest, sort of introduce, tell you more about the rest of the faculty. So Seton Hall works on a scholar-teacher model. And so what that means is we expect excellence in the classroom and we expect excellence in scholarship as requirements for tenure and promotion. We have a full-time faculty of 16, and 4 of those faculty members have been recognized as University Teacher of the Year. So there is no other unit on campus that can claim that winning percentage. So in a very real sense, we have the strongest teaching faculty at Seton Hall. The numbers back it up. That number 4 has added significance for diplomacy right now because it's also the number of faculty with forthcoming books. And so these are worth acknowledging, I mean, not just because books take a really long time to write, but they're also, worth acknowledging not just for the achievement, but for the visibility that those achievements bring. And it's worth underscoring again, you'll have opportunities to take classes with all of these colleagues in the coming years. The school is organized into 4 research centers, focusing on UN and global governance studies, peace and conflict studies, and global health. The Center for Emerging Powers is undergoing some, I guess, some spring cleaning or some late fall cleaning, and it's about to reorganize as the Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Each of these centers will be sponsoring talks and offering ways for you to get involved. Okay, so we cover the globe. The full-time faculty cover the globe both functionally in terms of our research areas, but also regionally. So you will have the chance to take undergrad diplomacy classes focusing on Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. So one of those centers is directed by our next speaker, Professor Yanzhong Huang. He is an extraordinarily busy fellow as of late. He heads up our global health specialization, and he directs our Center for Global Health Studies. He is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And the reason why he is so busy is that his work on China and COVID have put him in demand for media commentary. So at this point, he seems to be always being interviewed or preparing for an interview. And he has been published in the New York Times more times than I can rightly count. So his book is one of those 4 that I mentioned. It's called Toxics, China's Environmental Crisis and Its Challenge to the Chinese State. And it was published in September. In September, right. It's been a long week. So without any further ado, I give you my colleague, Professor Yanzhong Huang. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Martin, for that very generous introduction. Again, my name is Yanzhong Huang. I joined the school in 2003. Can't believe it's been more than 17 years. And I teach courses on global health, and we built the first academic concentration that examines health issues from a foreign policy and a national security perspective in this nation. And we also, as I said, I direct the Center for Global Health Studies. We published a flagship journal called the Global Health Governance that many of the students actually joined the editorial team as either assistant or associate editors. And again, I have a bifurcated interest in terms of research. I'm interested in global health issues, but I'm also interested, have a regional interest in China. Sometimes, these two is connected by events like the COVID. So actually, in the following, I'm going to give a mini presentation on the impact of COVID pandemic and U.S.-China relations. Can you see the slides?
Yes,
Robert?
we can. Yes, we can.
Great. So I'll just, okay. All right, so the title is How COVID-19 Accelerates the US-China Decoupling, right? We know historically, right, the pandemics, I'm sorry, this title is not placed in the right place. Historically, pandemics have affected international relations in various ways. They could jeopardize a state's material power. They could affect the power balance internationally. They could also undermine a country's capacity to conduct foreign relations. We saw that from the plague of Justinian in the 6th century, which is considered the first pandemic in recorded history. That was also seen in the Bubonic plague in the 14th century and the Spanish flu in the 20th century. And pandemic also could incentivize international cooperation. We saw that in 2009 H1N1 pandemic, when health authorities in both the United States and China in exchange of technology and information, in monitoring the spread of flu virus and in accelerating the development of a vaccine. But this time, what is interesting is that the COVID-19 only sets the two countries further apart. In fact, with all the buck passing and finger pointing, the U.S.-China relations reached its some called the lowest point since 1989. If you look at this Pew survey that was released in March, but there's a significant increase of the negative opinions in China in the United States. That was further confirmed by a more recent survey of 12 OECD countries on their opinions on China. But in the meantime, this pandemic also solidifies anti-Americanism and nationalism in China. According to a study released by the University of California at San Diego, Chinese public's views toward the United States in May 2020 were significantly more negative than those in June 2019. So what happened, right? In fact, if you look at those problems in U.S.-China relations, many of those problems actually could be identified in the pre-COVID era, right? Actually, since 2010, when China became the second largest economy in the world, it has become more assertive, more aggressive about issues it considered its core interests, like issues on South China Sea or Taiwan. And the United States, is increasingly viewed as the only major impediment in realizing China's dream of regaining its greatness in the world. China, they use this word, the great national rejuvenation, right? And in the face of this growing assertiveness of the Chinese power, the U.S. policy community also shifted in its view toward China, right? That policy of constructive engagement that was implemented since the early 1970s were now basically abandoned and giving way to a different policy, in the Trump administration called disengagement. Right? So what has happened during the pandemic is that it accelerated, this trend of disengagement. I could point it out several areas, issues, exactly what happened during the pandemic that accelerated this trend of disengagement, or if you will, decoupling. Right. First of all, emergence of a novel virus, which even today we still have a lot of unknowns about the virus. Right, it actually gave rise to this conspiracy theories on both sides on the origins of the outbreak. Right, both sides seems to think of the other side it was weaponized a virus then spread to the world. That exacerbate this trust problems, and that mistrust was exacerbated by the politicization of the outbreak in both countries. Right, we know, for example, in the United States, that the administration blamed China for its own mishandling of the outbreak, and in China, they tried to sort of reshape the official narrative on how China handled the virus, right? Even though there was clear mishandling of the outbreak, even though there was clear, right, that the lack of transparency in the beginning stage of the outbreak, the new narrative basically portrayed China as being like seamless, as being successful in containing the spread of the virus in a very short period of time, right? So these efforts serve to beef up the regime legitimacy in China. And secondly, when you look at the pandemic response, right, it follows the pattern of what we call securitization. Basically, we want to actually the whole world they try to portray the pandemic, the virus, sort of as an existential threat. and that requires, the response, the emergency measures out of those normal boundaries. So it has actually rendered international health cooperation between the United States and China even more difficult, because now this when you look at the both countries look at this potential health cooperation from a more narrow and calculated national interest, right? So even like when China was trying to donate masks to other countries, even though they were making all those pledges, to other countries for their vaccine, to the coming vaccine access, it also became tools for pursuing national interest. So all this securitization efforts now look at the health cooperation from a narrow national self-interest perspective. That makes, again, cooperation less likely. And third, when we look at the virus itself, right, this transporter spread of the virus, actually, as Dr. Edwards pointed out, that caused the disruption of the global supply chain. It actually highlights the danger of mutual interdependence, right, and globalization, right? Because if you are so connected, if you are so dependent with each other, right, it also makes a virus, that emerged in a country like China could quickly spread to another country and cause all these damages, right? So there was cause in the United States for hard decoupling. The administration calling for relocating industries back to the United States, right, to shorten the supply chain. And in China too, right, among the Chinese elites, they were calling for the so-called dual circulation, that emphasizes self-sufficiency, not rely on the United States for its economy. And finally, not finally, the fourth, there's this problem of reentry of ideology in U.S.-China relations. So when we look at the pandemic response, right, the issue now is reframed as a competition between democracies and authoritarianism. And for China, it highlighted how their model is superior to liberal democracy, right, by pointing out how successful the Chinese government was in containing the spread of the virus spread. And they also pointed to how ineffective the U.S. has been in stemming the spread of the virus. And for the United States, they use that pandemic to justify a new ideological war with China by portraying this confrontation between the two countries as a sort of an ideological war, right, between authoritarianism and free liberal democracy. So this also contributed to the lack of cooperation between the two. And finally, there's the issue of balance of power at stake, right? If you look at the balance of power between the United States and China, many people say, well, this is a pandemic. It's going to affect every country, right? Including China. And indeed, the pandemic has taken a heavy toll on the economy and society in China, but that shock, right, is not the same as that on the United States, right? And actually, according to the World Bank estimate, the U.S. economy will contract by 6.1% this year, while China's growth actually only slows to 1%, right? So given the size of their two economies last year, right, U.S. is like 21.43 trillion US dollars, and the China is like 14.14 trillion dollars. So the gap in gross domestic product between the two will continue to shrink, but in China's favor. Right? So as long as the power shift continue to shrink in China's favor, it's going to sustain that feel, right, of China is using the pandemic, to displace the United States in that power balance. So the United States feel more threatened, that means, right, the two countries are more likely going to fall into that so-called Thucydides trap. Right? That is a term coined by Harvard professor Graham Allison to describe an apparent tendency toward war. When you have an emerging power like China threatening to displace existing great power like the United States to be the international hegemon, right? So that the mistrust, that hostility is going to continue, right? And very likely it's not going to change even with the shift to a new Biden administration in the future. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you for your patience.